So my name is Matt Raible, and I've been driving this VW bus for the past summer, and it's beautiful, as is art. I grew up in the backwoods of Montana with no electricity and no running water, and I had to walk 2 miles to the bus stop every day. And yes, it was uphill both ways. It was funny, when I was a kid, we actually had a Commodore 64 in a separate cabin from the one that I lived in. It was my parents' bedroom, and we actually had to start a fire to get the TV or the monitor warm enough so that we could actually use the computer. So it's quite a different experience back then than what we have now with all the technology around us. I have a strange obsession with Volkswagen vans and Volkswagen buses. So just so you're aware of that, if you have a similar obsession or you like those, hit me up and we probably have a lot to talk about. So today we're going to talk about how to become an artist, and an artist in Angular and Angular development. And so when I started researching this topic and coming up with a talk for it, I thought, man, it would be, there's got to be some other resources on how you become an artist. And so sure enough, I found this on WikiHow on how to become an artist. And there's part 1 of 3. There's basically 3 different parts. The first part is learn the basics on your own. Part 2 is learn from others. And part 3 is promote your work. So you can see I've transcended all the way to part 3, and I've done a lot of part 2. And today I'd like to share with you part 1. So we're going to try, take some time and try some various mediums of art. And so in the Angular world, this might be, not just Angular, but you might try React, you might try Ember, you might try just jQuery, and a server-side framework. You need to recognize your strengths. For example, I realize I'm not that good at working on Volkswagen, so I typically have other shops do it. I am good at coding, so that's why I'm doing stuff like this. Do your research and learn the basics, get the supplies you need, observe the world around you, make time for your art every day. So you can see how these principles and these steps to becoming an artist can easily apply to becoming a framework expert or a language expert, or just someone that can be really good with code. And so in the Angular world, one of the things I like to look at is jobs on LinkedIn. This is just US. They recently changed the statistics so you can't search worldwide. But if you look at Backbone versus Angular versus Ember versus Knockout versus React, you'll see that Angular has a lot more jobs, a lot more people are hiring for it. And job growth, it's interesting that September, early 2015, there was a huge growth in Angular. And then it kind of plateaued earlier this year, and now it's sort of flattened out. And even Backbone, you can see, is kind of dropped over the years. LinkedIn skills, these are people who have specific skills on their LinkedIn profile. You can see there's a whole bunch of people with Angular and not so much with the other ones. React has certainly increased, and you actually have to remove Angular to see how the other ones stack up to each other. So Backbone still has quite a people that learned it and still keep it on their resumes. Knockout, not so much. Ember's actually at the bottom now, even though I think it's a pretty nice framework, and React has certainly had a lot of growth. Skills-wise, these are people, that same graphs that we showed earlier. You can see that Angular, everyone's adding it to their skills. React, kind of the same thing. All the rest are somewhat flat. If we look at Google Trends, I took this screenshot today, and I can't really explain the drop-off except maybe Angular redid their site and lost a whole bunch in the last month or so. I've done this before, and if I redo the screenshot or redo the search, chances are that anomaly will go away. So you can see, all the way up until the end there, Angular is really taken off, and a lot more people are searching for it. Could mean they're searching for help, but still, it's a sign of a large community. And then what about Angular 2? If we had Angular 2 in there, you can see it's had a similar trajectory that not even React, even though there's a lot of React talk, can keep up with. And then similarly, a strange anomaly drop off at the end. So, if I did these screenshots tomorrow, that might all go away. So this all proves one thing, and that is Angular is a hot skill to have. And so if I'm at a conference and I have a big audience in front of me, I usually say, who wants to learn Angular? And then 3 people raise their hand, and I'm like, come on, yes. And so I can hear you all yelling at me, yes, you want to learn Angular. So thank you for coming. Great, glad you're here.
Yes.
So with Angular, There we go. But there's really thousands of people out there, right? So with Angular 1, Hello World was pretty easy. It was just basically, a typical HTML document and a script tag. And, you'd have an input field that had two-way binding with the ng model there. And then basically anything you typed into that input field would be rendered in that H1 2 lines below it. So that's, very easy to do. Not that complicated. Two, a framework map. And if we're going to talk about the art of Angular in 2016, I think we have to talk about Angular 2. And so the difference between AngularJS and Angular 2 is, first of all, Angular 2 is not JS. You can use JavaScript with it, but a lot of people are using TypeScript. And second of all, it's not so much web-based, so they kind of removed the JS and trying to be more generic. You can use it for mobile, you can use it with Electron in a desktop, and it's a little different from a hello world perspective. If you see here, here's just the beginnings of a document. We have an Angular 2 QuickStart. Obviously, the style sheet and viewport aren't really necessary, but then instead of just one library, we have a number of libraries that we have to import. And so these are things that have been extracted out of Angular or out of other libraries, and they're using these to basically not have the whole enchilada in one library. And then you have to do a few more things. You have to configure system.js, and of course you could take this 10 lines of code and put it in a JavaScript file, but this is how system.js basically registers Angular, and then it imports an app.main file. And then that app.main is what's rendered in that component at the bottom where it says my app and it's loading. So this is that app.main. It just has a couple imports. If you're a Java developer, this might look familiar. The syntax is a little different. But the cool thing is if you're using IntelliJ or another TypeScript-aware IDE, chances are it'll import for you and you don't have to memorize all the import statements. So platform browser dynamic, bootstrap module, and even in the release candidates up until the Angular 2 release a couple weeks ago, even that last line was different. So things have been changing a lot with the release candidates, but with the final release that they just had, they said they're going to use semantic versioning. So if they break anything or change any of the API, they'll actually bump the whole version. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Angular 20 in the next couple of years. So Angular 3 might even hit before the end of the year if they need to break stuff. So then to create that component, the main app component, you can see the selector my app. Different from Angular 1. Angular 1 used directives, and you could put the directive name on an element in a div. You could put it in an attribute. Well, with Angular 2, it's more like web components, and so you're actually creating your own specific tag. So this will have a my app tag like we saw earlier, and then you're just importing the component. It looks like an annotation if you're familiar with Java, that component decorator. And that was going to be a part of ES7, and I believe they just dropped it. So at least it's in TypeScript. And from what I've seen, if you try to do ES6 and develop Angular 2, there's not a lot of documentation out there, so you're kind of banging your head against the wall, and sometimes it's just easier to do TypeScript. There's not that much new in TypeScript over ES6, but it does make it easier, and just there's so much tutorials written with TypeScript, it just makes it adopting the framework a little easier. And then, similar to Java, you do a class and you do the curly braces. But you export it so you can import it in other places. So with Angular 2, basically, one of the hard things is you're forced to choose a language and make dev environment decisions before you create your project. Now you don't have to. You can just take what everyone else is doing. But you can use JavaScript ES5, ES6. You can use Dart. And they're actually rewriting a version of Angular 2 with Dart. The core of Angular 2 right now is written with TypeScript. And basically anything that transpiles to JavaScript. So you could use CoffeeScript if you wanted. And then to set up your development environment, you'll need Node, you'll need a package manager, a module loader, a transpiler, and a build tool. And so unlike Angular 1, where all you needed was an HTML file, Angular 2 has gotten a bit more complicated. And that's why I referenced the graphic up in the corner there with the paradox of choice, because as we get more, it seems like we lost a little, and now we're faced with all these choices. And so a lot of people are just choosing basically TypeScript and Webpack and Gulp and build tools like that. So the easiest way to get started from what I've found is, rather than going through the tutorials you see online, there's a few basically seed applications and tools you can use to simplify things. So the first thing, if you just everyone else and use Google's advice, I'd recommend using the Angular 2 QuickStart. And so this is just a project on GitHub that you clone and you use, and it sets up the bare bones for you. There's no functionality in that application. There's also Angular 2 Seed, which I've written a couple of tutorials using. And this is really nice. It even has the ahead of type compiling enabled. And it basically has some features in the application, nothing like authentication or anything advanced like that, but just basically listing some people and allowing you to delete them. And so kind of like a to-do list. And then the one that I've started using more and more is Angular CLI. And Angular CLI is basically inspired by Ember CLI, which allows you, when you want to start a new project, to just type ng new project name. And you don't have to set up all the TypeScript stuff, npm. You don't have to set up your package.json. It basically generates all that for you. And just to show you what the quick start looks like, I'll pull up my browser here. Angular quick start. That's one on GitHub. Then there's this one here. You'll start going through here and you'll see like there's not really a hello world. You create, and then you have to create these files. You have to create this file, and you have to create this file. Holy cow, like there's no way you're typing that by hand, right? You got to copy and paste it. And then you install the packages, and then you got to install typings, and then finally you're creating your application. And then you got to set up a module, and you got to create a component, and then you start your application. And this is the meat of it right here, your main.ts, and then your web page. So it's a lot of work, and that's why I recommend Angular CLI, is just you can kind of get away from that and just get right to coding. And if you wanted to go back and set it from scratch, well, you could, and then just copy and paste your code over. So that's why I mentioned that. It just simplifies things quite a bit. So let's look under the hood of Angular 2. I'm going to do a demo starting with Angular CLI, and I'm going to build a basic search feature, and we'll grab data via HTTP rather than coding it into our actual classes. So it would be like if there was a real endpoint on the server that we could talk to. And then there are unit tests and integration tests that I can go over and show you, but I don't know if we'll have enough time for that. So we'll just kind of see how it goes. In the past, I've also had visibility of the audience falling asleep, and this time I don't have that. So hopefully you won't fall asleep, but it can get kind of boring just watching someone code. So let's get to it and we'll see how it goes. So I went ahead and created an application before this meetup. And the reason for that is npm install. It takes forever, right? 2 minutes, 39 seconds. There's no way you guys want to actually watch me do that. So I just created this VJUG24 demo. You can see the time. I did it only a few minutes before we started. I CD'd into it, and then I ran this tree command so you can see all the files. This Angular CLI is some metadata for the actual tool, and then there's some end-to-end tests. There's Karma configuration for unit tests. There's package.json, which is the dependency management. If you're familiar with Gradle or Maven, similar to that. Protractor for doing the Selenium WebDriver integration tests. And then here's our actual code in the source director. We have app. That's where we have some components. And then we have some assets. This is where maybe CSS would go, or outside libraries. It also supports Sass by default. So you could actually put a Sass file there, and it would compile it automatically for you. So it's really a great tool that's pretty smart. And if we look at the version of it, you can do ng version. There it is. It's beta 15. So to install it, if you don't have it, you would just do npm install -g Angular CLI latest. And then you would install it, and then you could do ng new just like I did there. So cancel that. Now I'll open this in my IDE. I have to create a new project, so we'll just do static web. Point to vjug24 demo. Okay. So one of the things you'll notice is it's already integrated with Git by default. We only have one unversioned file, and that's our IML file, so we can ignore that. And then any files we create during this, you'll basically see down here, so we can kind of see what's changed or if it modified any existing ones. So one of the things I like with IntelliJ and using it with Angular 2 is TSLint or even JSLint if you're doing just regular AngularJS with JavaScript. This TSLint file basically defines all the different, if you should have semicolons at the end of a file or how many spaces you should have versus tabs and stuff like that. There's also this editor config that configures IntelliJ for you, or it configures Eclipse for you, so you don't have to worry about changing that between. So I've seen this in a lot of generators. It's a pretty handy feature. So with TSLint, what you can do is you can configure that within IntelliJ. You have to install the plugin, but I already have it installed. So you can go to TSLint and you just enable it. And then it searches for it. And then basically now if you go into a TS file and you, for instance, this is another thing. So compile TypeScript to JavaScript. I haven't had much luck with this, so I usually say no. And from the people that have enabled it, one of the things I notice is they get JS files and JS.map files right alongside their regular files. So TypeScript is so similar to JavaScript that I haven't really had a problem not enabling it. And then with the ng commands to compile and serve and test and everything, it'll catch any compile errors. But with TSLint, if you don't have a semicolon, you'll see it gives you a little red squiggly, just like if you didn't have it in Java. So pretty handy feature there. And then there's a command to do testing. So you can do ng test. And it basically runs your test continuously and just waits for you to add new tests or modify tests. And if it sees any file changes, it'll run your test again. But you might not always want that because some people don't like the command line. So you can see there 3 tests to start. But you can also go in here, or not here. You can create a new configuration for Karma, which I already have installed as well. I'll just call it Karma. And then point to the configuration file, which is in our project. And then we'll close this one. And you could run it here. Right, so that's just kind of showing you, with Angular 2 that it's very IDE friendly, and the tools that you would use for testing and for actually writing code, you can use right within your browser. You don't have to use part of, Angular CLI. But you'll notice here, there's also this button right here that you can automatically toggle rerunning of testing. So similar to ng test, where it would add new tests all the time and rerun them, you can do that right here. And then the next time I hit run, it would automatically do those. I'm not going to do that right now because I got to write some code. So I like using the terminal right in IntelliJ. And basically, there's ng generate that you can generate components, services, pipes, filters. Filters are called pipes in Angular 2. But there's a shortcut G, and then you can do component. But you can also shortcut that to C, and then we can create a search component. So that just creates a few files for us right there. You'll see up in our application. There they are. So to add this actual module with ng or with Angular CLI, what they did have for a while back was generate route search, and it would actually generate your component and your route. And that was a pretty handy feature. They decided to disable that, as you can see. And it's been disabled for 3 months now. So I don't know if it's really temporary or if it's permanent, but they're still working on it. So right now we have to actually add routing ourselves. And so to do that, you create a new app routing file. .ts for everything. And we'll go ahead and add it. I created live templates for all this, so you didn't have to watch me type every single character out. So if you're interested in any of those live templates, I can certainly share those with you. There's also live templates available for a lot of the Angular components that you can use to, basically get away from using Angular CLI, but I like CLI, so I don't really mind. But so to start with routes, you have to basically import routes and router module, and then you set up the routes. We have a search route, and we're making that the default. You can see there on line 6, there's no path, and it just redirects to search and does a full match. And I tried many times to get away from that, but that seems to be required. So you do have to have at least one component beside your app component basically serving up by default. So then you can see we're exporting app routing providers and routing, and we can go into our app module TS and import those. Import routing, and you'll see IntelliJ does that for me. That's pretty nice. Providers, app routing, providers. Import that as well. So now we have routing set up, and we're going to go into our search component and fill that out. This is just showing you that search works. So we have an ng search form. Oops. And this just has an input field with the name of query. And this is how you do the two-way binding with Angular 2. It's not always recommended, but it does work pretty well here. And then you can see a key up enter. This is how you do the event handling. You wrap it with parentheses. And then button type, same thing, another event handler. The cool thing about, while they have these default ones, is they don't have to actually create directives for each one of these. And it also is extensible where you can add your own event handlers. If there's something new that comes along from some device instead of click or key up or whatnot. And then to fill out our search component, we're going to have a query variable. It's going to be a string. It's not like Java, it's not uppercase. And then we're going to have search results. It's going to be any. And then in our constructor here, we'll just do a console log. Make sure we're hitting that. And then the other thing that it offers, which is different from Angular 1, is each component has its own CSS. So it uses the shadow DOM, so you could just add CSS for this element. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just making it a block level element and adding some padding. But you can see you could actually have CSS specific to that component, and you don't have to use classes and IDs as much. You can still have a global CSS file, but it really gives you fine-grained control over the elements themselves. So just to prove all this works, let's do ng-serve. That's going to do a bunch of compiling with Webpack. And it says everything's good to go. So I can go here, and it serves it up at 4200. And you can see our app works. But there's a problem down here. Can't find primary outlet to load the search component. Well, that's because you need a router outlet. So in app component, add this tag router outlet. And then it reloads for you. It does take a little bit to compile, so hopefully that'll get faster. But now you can see we actually do have a search component here. But it doesn't do anything because when we click on it, we haven't implemented any method. So now we have to do that. So if we go in to create our backend, first I'm going to create some data. And I'm going to call this search data people JSON. And so since I'm from Denver and we like American football here, I like the Denver Broncos. And so I put some of my favorite players in there. And then we're going to create a search service. So we'll cancel this guy out. ng generate service. And you can also just type S and then search. And so this doesn't actually put it compartmentalized like I would expect it to right into the actual project. It actually sets it up outside of it right here. So I like to move these files up into shared search. And then you can see the difference between components and services is services are usually injectable, so they have the injectable annotation or decorator. If you remove that like you would like to as a Java developer, it's not going to work. So at least IntelliJ warned you about it. So now we'll fill this guy in. What I did here is everything's mostly the same. We added HTTP in the constructor, and then I added a getAll method that basically calls that people.json and then maps a response to JSON. And since I wanted to map this, I'm using TypeScript, so why not put it into classes? I created this address in this person class, and these constructors basically allow you, like you can with Groovy, to just pass in a map. And then if it's defined in there, then it sets it. If it's not, it doesn't. So I have an address and a person. That's kind of my data model. And that's how it's going to work. So then I need to export that. So in here, export star from service. I get a little code completion there. And then I'm going to take the component and I'm going to add the search service. So first of all, make this into an array of persons. Import that. Okay. And then down here, I can import yes. Or I could just type that out, probably would have been faster. But public search service, and you could make it private as well. And whatever you do, the one thing that's different between TypeScript and ES6 is this will actually make it a local variable, so you can access it without doing some logic here that sets it to a local variable. So once we have that, we can define a method that gets everything, and this just calls the search service, and it uses observables to say, I want to subscribe, and with the data, go ahead and populate search results, and if there's an error, then make that console log. So that's our method there. Not sure what's, the red's gone now. So the other thing we have to do, if we tried this out right now, which we might as well, so we can see if there's any errors, is you have to actually make the service available as a view provider to the main app component. So I'll just show you the error so you can kind of understand what's going on. First of all, this is an error that tripped me up for a long time when I first got started, so I like to show this one as well. Property map does not exist on type observable. That happens in the search service, as you can see there, line 10. So they're talking about this map right here, and there is an import from RxJS that we need to add. And this is strange because in the different release candidates, sometimes you had to add this and sometimes you didn't. So in the latest final release, you do have to add it. In the RC5 release, I did not. So now you can see our bundle is valid. Should be able to load this up. Oh, no provider for search service. So that's what you see when you basically create a service, you want to use it in component and you haven't made it a view provider. So in this app component right here, view providers. Again, not that intuitive, but once you know it, pretty easy after that. So wait for this to reload. Now it reloads. Now we can search and we're just getting all the people, right? So let's make that look a little better. Make this into a table instead of just piping it to JSON. That is a handy feature though, right? If you have an object, because it's just going to print out object if you don't do this, but you can pipe it to JSON. It's one of the built-in filters in Angular 1 and 2. We're just going to make a table. If there's search results, then we'll show this. And this is what they had ng repeat in Angular 1. With Angular 2, it's ng4, and it uses the let syntax instead of vars. From ES6, person of search results, and then you can set an index if you want to, and then it just lists everyone. So if we were to go back here and search, now we got a table. Well, let's make that look a little better. Wait for it to reload. Hopefully the reloading will get faster because there is a couple seconds delay. And you can see we made it to here. So we're setting our component calling our service, everything's looking pretty good. But we're still not searching, right? I can't do pay and actually search for Peyton Manning. Still shows everyone. So let's implement search here. This just takes in a string query, and if it's not defined or it's star for some reason, then just go ahead and make it blank and basically return it, because it'll match everything if it's blank. And then what I do here is I just call that getAll method. Again, I map it, and using ES6 TypeScript syntax, basically get the results and map them out, use stringify, and then basically just see if it's included in the whole string. And if it is, it pushes back. So then our search component, we need to modify that because it's still calling getAll to call search, and then this query. Right, and this query is being set in here by the ng model that talks to that query. So now we can search for pay, and we actually get that person. So we're not yet complete. We probably want to, be able to edit the component. So we can make this into a link. You can see, this is a weird thing. Let's see if it's fixed. This didn't work with RC5 if I had an href that was empty. And with Angular 1, you had to have an href that was empty in order to get a link show up. Same thing here. If I don't have an href, you'll see that these actually don't have links on them. You can click on them, right? And it's trying to do something, but there's no real indication. So I like to do that. But with RC5, when it had a link on it, you would click on it and it would reload the page. Like it would try to do something and then reload the page. So let's see if that's fixed. No, still not fixed. So it is kind of unfortunate. You might have to use CSS to make a link look like a link. So this is what I've seen for their documentation on how to, select a record, basically. It's not always a traditional, looking web or website, right? There might not be links. There might be more like buttons or lists or something like that. So it does make sense that, they're not allowing, traditional links to look like links by default, but, it still seems kind of weird. So we're going to call an onSelect function. We're going to pass in the person, and then we'll go from there. So in here, we'll do ng onSelect. We're just going to define that method, takes in a person, and then we're going to navigate with that ID to the router. So we don't have a router defined, public router. Now we have a router defined. And if we were to try to go there, reloads, we don't have any routes for that. So you got to go into app routing and add a new route. And this also tripped me up for a while. You think, well, all I need to do is do a route like that and I'm good to go. But that's not a valid route because of what it needs is this parameter on it. Edit component. Do we already create our edit up here? No, we didn't. So cancel out of there. We'll create ng generate component edit. We already have the path for it. And it creates the form, just says edit works. Edit the form. So this is just normal form. I'm using ngIf just to make sure it doesn't, render anything badly. Has all, similar syntax to Angular 1. ng model to bind to two-way binding, and then an address to, show everything. And I like to put IDs on the elements, so when I'm writing protractor tests, I can easily get to those. And then you'll see it just has save and cancel. And then in our component itself, I'll go ahead and create it down below so you can see. At the top, it's still the same, right? Still has the same components, same selectors. We just added a bit more stuff. So at that address person, our search service of subscription, this subscription is used to basically subscribe to any parameters coming in that have an ID, converts that string to a number, and then it calls a service with that ID. And as long as it's defined, it sets those local variables up here that allow you to edit, an address. And then if there isn't anything, then it goes back to the list. And so this list right here, go to list, just use the routers and navigates that way. And then we'll need to change our service since we don't have a get function, and I'm going to change a search. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use local storage to kind of fake editing. So our search changes from, instead of looking at get all and just get all, it actually checks local storage as well. And then we look in local storage for this one. And when we save a person, we save it to local storage. So obviously this is, mostly a demo, but it does, show you how you might use local storage just to whip something up quick and easily for someone. So then we can also add some CSS if we wanted. Some simple stuff to make the buttons a little bigger. And then the other thing is that I'd like to do is in here, I'd like to make it so if you hit this search component and there's already a query in the URL, that it actually filters by that. And the reason for that is in this edit component, after the person actually saves, and if it's defined, we're going to set the term on the URL, and so we want to show that person and they got fixed. And so to do that, rewrite a different constructor, and this one takes an activated route. Activated route is something, again, from the router, and with that activated route, you can get the parameters, you subscribe to them, and then if the term is defined, you can decode it and then call search after you set that query. Let's see all this in action. It's good to have a beer nearby because then you can take a drink while you're waiting. Oh, we got an edit component error in our app routing. We never imported it because we created it after we created that. So let's go back here and then import it. Wait for it to compile. It's now valid. Reload. Cannot find module edit component. Oh, it's there. So it works even though it's giving us some warnings down there. And then you can basically say, okay, change that, and you'll see it changes in real time. And then if you save it, it goes back and it filters by that name, so it is doing the auto filtering. So based on time, I do have unit tests and stuff like that, but I won't show you that. But the good news is there is a demo that I wrote out here on GitHub, and it's got everything that we just did as well as all the unit tests. So you can certainly go through and see all that. Now I'll go back to the presentation. So there's a number of built-in components. Just like Angular 1, there's ng-if, there's ng-switch, and switch when, there's ng-style, ng-class, ng-for. And a lot of these upcoming slides are kind of boring because they just show you code. So I'm going to fly through them just so you know that they're there. With Angular 2 forms, they can be complex, and Angular provides controls and validators and observers. Controls encapsulate the input in the forms and give you objects to work with. Validators give you the ability to validate inputs just like you'd expect, and observers let you watch your forms for changes and respond accordingly. So the controls, you can create a new control and then you could get a value from it, but you can also query the control for errors, whether it's dirty, whether it's valid. And then once you do that, if you define it in your component, you'll use the ng control to bind that to it. And then you can also do a control group. So they have a common ancestor, control and control group, abstract control. That means you can check the status or value of the vehicle info just like we could otherwise. So you can see here that you can get errors for each element as well. Form directives are a constant that Angular provides for you to basically have a shorthand of several directors that are useful in forms for ng control group, ng form, and ng model. So some of the errors that you might see a lot of times with Angular 2 are just because you forgot an import, and it's not like an intuitive error message. I think they'll get better, but form directives is definitely one of those that you might want to keep in mind. An ng form will automatically get attached to any form tag that you have in your view. Really useful, but potentially confusing because it happens behind the scenes. So here's what that looks like. And it basically gives you a control group named ng form, and it gives you an ng submit output. Now you can see here, I didn't have anything calling ng submit in that previous HTML, but this, will automatically call that. It'll pass in the form, and then you could log, any of the form's value. So you can bind to the ng form fit action if you want, just by using ng submit on submit, but it does it by default too. And then you can also use a form builder. There's a form model that you can use if you have an existing control group. And then you can combine, or you bind that using the ng form control directive to the actual, item itself. So forms can be very complex. You can add validators. You can do the same class has error stuff like you did with ng1 to decorate them differently. And components can export or reference themselves, so you can use them in the view. So when you have # name, then you can reference it in other spans or in blocks below that show that the name is invalid or other errors. Data architectures, you can use two-way finding, flux, and observables. You can also use WebSockets, local storage, service workers. There's all kinds of different options. And RxJS and observables is becoming kind of the most common way that I've seen it do. Promises emit a single value, whereas streams emit many values. And so that's how observables kind of come into play instead of promises just getting one. Observables kind of take advantage of what we're seeing in the back end with reactive architectures where we can talk to streams and get that from those streams. So it's a very cool thing, and obviously that would be a whole presentation on its own. So just to let you know, there's a number of style guides out here. These have been invaluable for me in my consulting endeavors and just in the applications that I've built, in that they show you how you should be writing your code, and then you can structure your TS-lint accordingly, and then everyone on your team's kind of writing code the same way. So for AngularJS, Angular 1, there's a John Papa Angular style guide, that first one. And then for Angular 2, a lot of the people that actually do style guides combined. So even that Angular 2 style guide on the bottom have all been combined into that second one there. And John Papa's on board, and Miko Getchef's on board too, so everyone's kind of collaborated, so that's a great thing. Upgrade from Angular 1 to 2, you can do big bang or incremental. If you're going to use the NG upgrade model, that kind of allows you to pull in an Angular 1 app into an Angular 2 app. There's a number of cool projects out there, web workers and service workers, that basically allow you to do background services, and progressive web apps are something that really leverage these. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of these, especially since Google's pushing them, where instead of downloading an app, you actually start with a website and it progressively becomes more of an app as it downloads more functionality. You can do server-side rendering with Universal Angular 2. I do believe there's even Java bindings for that. I know there's Node bindings and other bindings. Electron, if you're on the right desktop apps with Angular 2. If you want to use the awesome Bootstrap and its widgets, there's ng2 Bootstrap and Feel UI are two projects. And if you download the PDF, which I will upload tonight, you can click on these links and actually get to those projects. And there's also, if you're just still doing Angular 1, there's a great plugin called Angular Watchers, which allows you to see all the watchers on your page. And you might realize that your application's using a whole lot of memory because you're using two-way binding where you don't need to. And so that's a handy plugin for Chrome. And then JHipster, if you're a Java developer, you like Spring Boot, you like Angular, JHipster kind of marries them together and does it in a really nice way. There's also NG Book 2, a comprehensive guide to developing with Angular 2. I've read it a couple times, and they keep it up to date, and it's just awesome. So lots of code. It's how I learned to do all the testing in Angular 2, and really good book. If you want to see who's using Angular 2, there's Made with Angular for Angular 1 and Built with Angular 2. And then I noticed this came out today, Angular 2 Performance Checklist. Kind of some things you should look at. The ahead of time compiling in Angular 2 is pretty sweet because it basically allows you to delete the parts of Angular's code base that you're not using. So instead of having a 200K JavaScript app, You only have a 20K or a 30K because that's all the functionality you're using. And there's a lot with HTTP2 that kind of allows us to do prefetching of resources and not combining all our JavaScript and CSS together. So lots of good things coming down the pipeline. So how to become an artist, part 2 is learn from others. So y'all did that in this one. So that's pretty cool. But there's also a shortcut, and that is just do it. Start developing even simple apps or apps that you want to do and start playing around with it. Maybe try to do a POC with it just for some sort of UI that you're developing at your company or for a client. And I think that's the best way to learn. And if you're into open source or you want to contribute to open source, there's these CLI demos. I just wanted to provide some links for those. But also, there's some open source Angular 2 projects. So Stormpath is a company that manages your users in the cloud and does identity management. The only reason I mention them is I work for them, and I started working yesterday for them. So they have an AngularJS SDK, which is basically a bunch of directives that you can integrate authentication into your application very easily. But there's also an Angular 2 SDK, which I'll be working on, and it's just in the beginnings. And so if you're looking to help with Angular 2, you can click on that once you have the PDF and actually look at that project. And then JHipster, we're working hard on making Angular 2 available in it as well. And there's a number of tasks there that you could jump in and help out with. So really great learning opportunities if you like to code. So with that, does anyone have any questions?
Great presentation. Thank you, Matt. Indeed, we have a couple of questions from the RC watching us. Let me just go through them quite quickly. So one was fairly simple, and you mentioned JHipster. So people apparently know that you are, and this is a question from Craig D. So I know you're a JHipster committer. Do you have any idea when JHipster will release a version with Angular 2? So do you have an ATA or ETA or something? Can you give us any details?
It's moving along pretty well. And what I told people a month ago is if they were doing, if they needed to release a product by the end of the year, then use Angular 1. And then boom, all of a sudden they dropped Angular 2, right? And so now that's released. And that's really pushed the JHipster, involvement. And we have several people working on it. But unfortunately, only a couple of them get paid to work on it. I would say September 27th. I'll go November 1st. I think it'll be done by November 1st.
November
but hopefully
1st.
Sooner.
Excellent answer. Quite conservative, but also good. Another question from Saif Jordan. You showed the statistics at the beginning of this session, and you showed that Angular is way ahead of the others. Do you think the current that React will take over in the next few years, or do you think Angular will continue dominating the space?
I think they're in the Java space. We used to have many frameworks, and they all were competing all the time. And now kind of Spring MVC took over, and Wicked's still out there and people are using it, but you really don't hear about the other frameworks a whole lot. And so Angular is quite a ways ahead as far as frameworks go. And I think that's the difference. Is React is just an actual UI kit, and so I do see it catching up, but Angular is still taking off as well. So I think the hard part is that there's so many Angular 1 apps, and a lot of those people believe they need to upgrade them. So there's still a lot of adoption that might happen, but I think the competition's great. And React versus Angular versus Ember, it's all like a bunch of nice sports cars. So it's not like you're ever driving a jalopy.
Yeah, you buy one car or commit to a single framework, and then you run with it for a while. Great. Thank you, Matt, for
right, but you should try them all for
sure. Thanks for the inspiring session. We enjoyed that. Hope the people watching this now live or people watching this later on YouTube will enjoy this as much as we did. So it was a great show. Just